Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 557. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about forts and mansions, sea turtles, and the Gullah culture as we go to the Sea Islands of Georgia and South Carolina. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. We'll have more to talk about later, but first, let's talk about the Sea Islands. I'd like to welcome to the show Ruby and Peter from ajourneywelove.com, who come to talk to us about the Sea Islands. Ruby and Peter, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello. Nice to be here.
And we say the Sea Islands, and that's a little vague because a lot of seas have islands. So which islands are we talking about?
So this is in the United States and the East Coast, on the southern parts. So we're going to start from northern Florida to Georgia to South Carolina.
Excellent. Excellent. So we're talking about the barrier islands off the coast of the southeastern portion of the United States.
Correct.
Excellent. Why should someone go to the Sea Islands?
The Sea Islands, surprisingly, has a lot of history on it. During the day, it was the go-to spot of all these 1880s affluent families of America, like the Carnegies. Mm-hmm. Little is known about the Sea Islands. Like, you rarely see them in the tourist boards. So it's a small, little-known secret. But if you're a history buff, it's definitely a place to go.
And what should we do when we're in the Sea Islands? What itinerary do you recommend?
Well, if you're on the laying on the beach type of person, you could do that, but we're not. We would recommend a south to north trip. Flying into Jacksonville, Florida, which is the biggest airport in northern Florida. Mm-hmm. Rent a car, because without a car, it's almost impossible to drive around from island to island.
Okay.
From Jacksonville, we recommend driving up to Amelia Island.
Okay, and why are we going to Amelia? What are we going to find there?
Amelia Island is actually on the border of Georgia and Florida. It's actually one of the first places you will see in Florida if you are coming from up north. So in Amelia Island, the biggest municipality is Fernandina Beach, which, little known fact, is the only municipality to have flown 8 flags.
In the United States, that is, I'm assuming we're talking about here.
Oh, yeah. So it flew 8 flags, different countries, of basically like the countries it supported or conquered it at the time. They flew the Spanish flag, the French flag, the British flag, a green cross flag, the Mexican Revolution flag.
The Mexican Revolution flag. Hang on a second here. We're in northern Florida.
It's got a colorful history.
Why did they fly the Mexican Revolutionary flag?
Yeah, they had a few battles. I think the Spanish were there trying to conquer it, and I believe the Mexican army was there at one point for some reason. They didn't last there very long, but they were there at a small point in history.
I'm afraid I can't imagine when that small point in history was.
But like the most prominent one, the flags that they raised that stood into history and is more common to the locals is like the Confederate flag and also the Spanish flag. Also in Amelia Island, you will find Fort Clinch State Park, which is one reason why those 2 flags are the more prominent ones. So in Fort Clinch, it was originally built in 1700s by the Spaniards. When they first came to Florida, which means La Florida, the flower, the Spanish thought that it would be a great place to put a bastion in. So they fortified it, made it into Fort Clinch.
Okay.
So fast forward to the 1860s during the Civil War, the Confederates thought that it would be a good site as a safe house where they could hide. Unfortunately, the fort is made of bricks. And the 1860s already had cannons, so Robert E. Lee ordered all of them to abandon the fort, which is now left to the tourists.
All right.
It's a great spot to see dolphins and then actually see the reenactments that the state park employees are doing. You could also hear cannons if you go there on a weekend. They set off cannons once a day.
And just to add, for the Fernandina Beach, it has a very nice downtown area. It's very historic. It's not very big. You can walk it in about an hour just to look at the little shops and boutiques and different things. If you're hungry and you want to grab something to eat, I don't think there are any chain restaurants there, so you have these local places there. The one we liked was a place called, not very creatively, España.
Okay.
So it has Spanish tapas. So if you like Spanish tapas and sangria, that's a good place to try. And another place that we like serves big portions of pasta, pizza, things like that. It's called Arte Pizza, Arte. That's another nice little local Italian place. Nothing fancy. It's not fine dining, but it has good portions, good service, very friendly, and good food.
And before we leave Amelia Island, so I've got the answer to the question of why the Mexican rebel flag flew there. This would be not the Mexican flag because Mexico didn't exist yet. This is before we bought Florida from the Spanish in 1819. Two things happened. One was a Scottish-born soldier of fortune claimed the island on the behalf of the Green Cross. So that was the one you were mentioning. Yeah. And then Spanish soldiers kicked him out, but their attempt to regain control is foiled by American irregulars organized by Ruggles Hubbard and former Pennsylvania Congressman Jared Iron. And they joined forces with a French-born pirate who had claimed the island on behalf of the Republic of Mexico until they were driven out by the U.S. not to claim the island, but to hold it in trust for Spain because we bought the island shortly thereafter. Just bizarre. Okay, I did not know this little portion of history here. And that beats the Six Flags that fly over Texas, so by 2.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a bit obscure. It's funny.
Yeah. I did not know that one. That's just bizarre. Okay, excellent. Where are we going next?
2 options. Your next stop would be Cumberland Island. So there's a very exclusive inn in Cumberland Island, which can only be accessed by boat from Fernandina Beach. So if you plan to stay there overnight, that's where they pick you up in Fernandina Beach. However, if you're on a budget and don't want to stay at that exclusive inn, which is off limits to everybody else, you can drive up the coast and then take a ferry to Cumberland Island. Cumberland Island is one of those enigma islands for me because it's not one of those places that's connected to the land by a bridge. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, the only way to get to the Cumberland Island is by a boat, which is controlled by the National Park Services. So the whole of the Cumberland Island is protected by the National Park Service.
It is apparently a national seashore, I'm seeing, the Cumberland Island National Seashore. Okay.
Yes. To get there, you have to be on a boat. They only leave the mainland twice a day. There's no concessions in the island, so if you plan to do a day trip, make sure you pack your own lunch or dinner if you're planning to camp. And aside from Grayfield Inn, which is the exclusive resort, the only accommodation on the island is camping. Mm-hmm. But you have to get approvals from the National Park Service to get a permit. You have to do everything in advance, even the day tour.
So that sounds like not something we're going to do that day ahead, but we should do weeks ahead probably.
Secure all your reservations at least weeks in advance because it does get filled up, especially during the summer.
Okay, and one thing we should say is by the time we get to Cumberland Island, we've crossed over now. We're in Georgia.
Georgia, yes. So it's actually very, very close to Fernandina Beach by a few miles, but it's in a different state.
Yeah, it's in a city called St. Mary's. So St. Mary's is essentially the first exit on the I-95 highway. Okay. So it's the first entry point to Georgia is this small town called St. Mary's. And so what you do is you park your car in St. Mary's downtown, and you take the ferry there to Cumberland.
And why are we going to Cumberland?
90% of Cumberland used to be owned by the Carnegies, which are the steel magnets in the 1880s.
For me, I think of all the sea islands, I think Cumberland is my personal favorite, and that's because it's one of the few places, I mean, that I've personally been to where you can actually not only see wild horses just roaming around freely, but you can be essentially right next to them. You can rent a bike or you can walk around the island, and as you're walking around, you literally just come upon a horde of wild horses, and they're just roaming freely, no care in the world. And that's not a thing you see very often. And what makes it more interesting is that there are places, for example, when Carnegie came to the island, he built several things. So he built the Greyfield Inn, which Ruby mentioned earlier, that luxurious hotel. And he also built, of course, a mansion for his family. It's called the Dungeness Mansion. And unfortunately, that mansion essentially has been burned to the ground. So all you see now is the ruin of that mansion. And it's kind of an amazing sight to see because as you're walking around this mansion, the horses like to actually be there. So they kind of stay around that whole area. You have these ruins of the mansion, and you have these wild horses roaming around. You have wild turkeys. So it's kind of this interesting mix of nature and wildness and a historical ruin. For me, I guess it's kind of personally quite an interesting thing to experience.
And also as a side note, the history of Dungeness, the Carnegies built it in the early 1800s. It actually was first built as a tabby house because in the 1700s, Cumberland Island used to be a plantation. So the Carnegies bought it as their summer retreat from up north. In 1925, they abandoned the island, and in 1952, apparently somebody burned it to the ground.
One thing I should say before I get email is you talked about this being the only place for wild horses. Somebody's already in the process of writing me an email about Assateague and Chincoteague Island.
Yes,
much
we know
further
that, yeah,
north. We're going to get there.
It's in Virginia, I think.
Wait till the end of the show to send the email. So, yeah.
Yeah. So what I would recommend doing in Cumberland would be if you lack time and you don't want to do the bike to just see Dungeness, we would recommend doing the Lands and Legacies tour. It's done by the National Park Service, so your guide would be a ranger. This fills up, again, weeks in advance, so book it in advance. So essentially, it's a 6-hour tour that takes you from the south end of the island, where the ferry is, all the way up to the north end of the island, where you're going to see Plum Orchard Mansion, also owned by the Carnegies. This one is actually still intact. However, the furniture has been sold off, so what you see would be replicas of what it was like at the time.
Okay.
You can actually go inside by a guided tour only, again, through a ranger. Another thing that Lands and Legacies would show you is the First African Baptist Church, which is a small church built for the African Americans who used to live there in the island as staff, but is very famous for JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bissette's small wedding. They chose it as their venue.
Okay. I did not know that. Why? Do you know why?
From what the ranger said, they were looking for a place that's quiet, but it's also accessible because Greyfield Inn is just there. So from what we heard, they had their ceremony in the small African church and then had their reception in Greyfield Inn. It's a very small, compact church that only has space for 20 plus people. So I guess they invited very close family and friends to be there, see their ceremony, and then celebrate at the inn. It's very private.
Okay. One thing I should say that it caught my attention when I was looking at the map is when we're taking off on our ferry near St. Mary's, you're also right by the Naval Submarine Base at Kings Bay, which does appear to have a visitor center. I don't know if there's much that they allow you to see there, but if you're going out on to the island on the ferry, keep an eye out for submarines.
Yeah, we have not seen that, but I think we saw it there. We just haven't visited it.
Sure, yeah. Excellent. Where are we going to next?
After Cumberland Island, you drive up another 30 minutes up north to a place called Jekyll Island. Mm-hmm. And we go into Rockefeller and Vanderbilt's winter estates. So Jekyll used to be a winter estate, but then they have since parceled it off, and they have turned the biggest mansion into the Jekyll Island Club Hotel. And it's also managed by all the small houses that used to be estates, winter estates of these families have now been opened as a museum.
Interesting.
To actually go inside the house, you have to book the ticket at the museum in advance. Mm-hmm. And then they have a trolley that takes you around the islands, and then they guide you inside. you have to buy the tickets in advance.
Well, and one thing we should point out, since this is the second time you talked about somebody who had enough money and could be wherever they wanted to doing a winter estate down here, there's probably a reason they didn't do their summer estate down here. We're talking about an area that's quite temperate in the wintertime, but quite warm and hot and muggy in the summertime. Do you have a preferred time to do this trip?
Your best time would be like
Spring or fall.
Fall,
Okay.
winter, or spring.
Okay.
Beginning of spring or fall. I would say.
I would say that in Florida, it does rain a lot in the summer. So it's not, especially in Cumberland, it's not the best time to go.
Yeah, I would say May to August, just avoid that at all cost.
Well, and when we say it rains a lot, I remember before my first trip to Florida, they told me it rains every day at 5 o'clock, and I thought they were kidding.
Unfortunately, no, it does really rain.
We have thunderstorms every afternoon.
Exactly. I live in a place that gets thunderstorms once every 3 years, so that was just a foreign concept to me, but very humid, and therefore the sky just can only hold it for so long. And the other thing we should say is early fall is also going to be, you could run into some problems because that is hurricane season, and you never know when something might blow up that way. So, excellent. Where are we off to next, or is there more you want to say about Jekyll Island?
So in Jekyll Island, we have two more things that we can recommend seeing. So there's a Georgia Sea Turtle Center,
Oh, okay.
a nonprofit. They actually protect huge sea turtles. So if you do go inside their center, you would actually see huge pools where they put like the injured turtles, wait for them to be rehabilitated, and then they release them back in the wild. It's actually quite good. You could see like different species of them. So some of them they actually keep there because they cannot be released in the wild because of illness or various reasons. But it's definitely a great stop to your trip.
Interesting. I just didn't even think of that area as being an area for sea turtles. And these are still the great big sea turtles I'm thinking of for like Costa Rica area,
Yes.
2-3 feet in length or something?
Yes, they're actually big. Yeah, they're very big.
Huge.
The number one thing to do in Jekyll Island, surprisingly, it's a beach, but
It's a unique beach.
it's a unique beach. Driftwood Beach, that's what the beach is called. There are no parking spots on Driftwood Beach. You just have to find a spot at the road and then walk your way to the beach. So it's a bit on the end of the island, but what makes it unique is that all these trees that used to line the island have been eroded into the sea, and it became driftwood. So they created so many patterns on the beach that it would be a photographer's dream to go there like an hour before sunset and then take photos.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. You just see these just trunks of trees, and they're twisted in different ways, and they're curved and in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. And so it's a very popular destination for weddings, of course, and celebrations and things like that. But when we were walking there, we saw a lot of photographers just taking different angles, and it's just a really beautiful place to experience.
Interesting.
We have to warn you about the bugs.
There's a lot of bugs. There's a lot of weird black beetles running around, so it's not... it's just a fair warning.
And just in that area, these are bark beetles or something like that?
Yeah.
It's like
Okay.
small beetles just running around. So they're not like, I don't think they're harmful, but it's just...
No,
it's
but
just kind of...
they're definitely not for lounging around.
there's a lot of them.
Yeah. So it's just it's just perfect if you just want to stroll around in the beach. It's
Very
a
nice
long
spot.
beach, yeah. But just remember where you parked your car, because there's no parking spots.
All right. Where to next?
After Jekyll Island, you go up north again to St. Simon's Island. St. Simon's Island has the same feel as Jekyll Island, where there are historic houses that you can only see through a guided tour, again with a trolley, and then you get to see inside the houses. There's a lighthouse at the end of it that you can also climb up to. And another thing that we recommend that you see is Fort Frederica National Monument. So we're leaving Spanish territory and moving into the British territory.
Fort Frederica was built by the British to protect against Spanish raids, because the Spanish, for a long time, just kept trying to kind of conquer that place and other places along the coast. Essentially, it's not a big fort. I mean, I think at its peak, it was about 500 people who lived there. The fort itself was built by a guy named Oglethorpe. If you're familiar with Savannah, Georgia, and the way it's laid out, then essentially he was the same guy who built this fort. So he kind of built this fort and built a small little like colony or village around it, very similar style to Savannah, but of course smaller. But then it got abandoned, sat there for a while, nothing was done to it. and then it was taken over by, I guess, the government, and now it's kind of preserved. And there's a park ranger, there's a tour there you can view. So it's kind of a nice little stop to learn more about that part of history.
Excellent.
Also a great spot to look at gators, because if you look out,
Of course, gators.
I believe the only great spot to look at gators is from a great distance, but that is just my opinion.
That's one man's opinion.
That is one man's opinion.
if you look out over the wall, you could actually see the gators by the river and the marsh outside. It's actually great
Yeah,
there.
it's interesting.
If there's a great big wall between me and them, I think I probably would enjoy it more. Okay.
As a side note, Brunswick is the closest city to St. Simon's Island, so we could recommend like spending an hour there. It's actually another historic city in the mainland, so you're definitely gonna pass it. You won't miss the big bridge that's connecting St. Simon's Island to Brunswick.
I'm guessing that their local convention and visitors bureau would recommend more than an hour, but good to know. Okay. Anything particular you would recommend we see in our hour in Brunswick?
If anyone likes antiques, then for some reason, the sense that that particular part has a lot of antique stores and different shops. And I think they have markets, antique markets on certain weekends. So if you're lucky, you might catch one. When we were there, we certainly saw one, and it was pretty active, actually. And it was all ages. And you would see a lot of different things. You would see old photographs, jewelry, cutlery, old books, and different things. So it was quite interesting to see. It has a few nice restaurants there. When we were there, we tried two places. Barbara Jean is one place. It's a nice southern restaurant, big portion, typical southern food, sweet tea. And there's another place for barbecue, Southern Soul Barbecue. So just a few things to try there. And it's just kind of like a nice, I'd say, nice, pleasant southern town, really, is the best way I describe it.
Okay, also in Brunswick, there's the Lover's Oak. Myself and Peter actually went here to Lover's Oak. So folklore has it that the Native American, like the warriors, would meet with their loved ones under the oak tree. And legend also has it that if you kiss your loved one, you would end up with them under the tree. So it's quite cute for couples to, if you believe those folklores.
Or it's just a good excuse to kiss your loved ones. So what do you got to lose?
Under a tree. This is true.
Excellent. Where are we off to next?
As a side note, so between St. Simon's Island and our next destination, there's another island called Sea Island. So the only access to Sea Island is through one of the two resorts/hotels. The 5-star, The Cloisters, is actually located there. But me and Peter haven't personally been there because the prices of these resorts are
quite high.
Quite high.
Yeah, I believe the Cloister is the only 5-star property or hotel in the state of Georgia. It's owned by these two resorts. So there's the Cloister and there's also the Sea Island Beach Club. And I believe both resorts are owned by the Anschutz family. Among other things, they own the LA Lakers. So I think it's really the only one that I can think of all these sea islands that's kind of a little bit more restricted, really.
Okay. And where is your next stop that you are taking us to that I can afford to go to?
So the next one is Sapelo Island. Sapelo is only accessible by either a guided tour or if you have friends or family that are staying on the island. So our recommendation, since we don't have friends or family there, would be to go on the guided tour. Reservations are done by phone and also in advance. What they will do is they will take you on a half-day tour to see Sapelo Island and invite you into the Gullah culture. Residents of Sapelo Island are actually the Gullahs.
The Gullah culture is essentially a culture of the West African slaves who were brought over by the English. And these are the remaining descendants of this culture. It's quite a similar culture to the Bahamas, the people of the Bahamas. So it's they share there. There's a few things you can see there. There's a big mansion there called the Reynolds Mansion. There's a lighthouse at the far end of the island. And so as you're doing this tour, you kind of see these historical stop-off points. And I think at a certain point, I believe you'll also meet these native residents. And I believe they specialize in making the sweetgrass. Is it called sweetgrass?
The baskets.
The baskets, yeah. Sweetgrass baskets. Very nice, beautiful looking baskets.
They're all handmade by the Gullahs themselves. And the locals actually speak their language.
Dialect, yeah.
So it's interesting to see their culture. And also, if you are going to take the tour, at least in me and Peter's case, you are actually going to ride on an old school bus.
Oh yeah. There's no van or cars. It's just you basically load up on a school bus and you're just gonna drive around the island in a school bus. So it's kind of funny and interesting, and it was enjoyable. It was not too bad. So
And your tour guide slash driver is actually a resident of the island. So it's a very immersive tour, one that we would definitely recommend. And please book in advance because they only do one tour on certain days a month.
Well, and the whole reason why this is a separate culture and why they were able to preserve so much more of their African culture than so many of the people who were brought over into slavery is interesting because this was a very difficult place to live with malaria and yellow fever and all those sorts of things. And they were brought over from the rice coast of Africa because they knew how to grow rice, and that grows in this area, or did grow at least in this area. But the plantation owners didn't really want to be here in the summertime, and so they had a lot more independence than a lot of other slaves who were brought over. And so they just were able to keep more culture and didn't assimilate quite as much. And then, of course, after slavery ended, they're still out there on these remote islands where they have to this day kept more culture for such a long period of time. So fascinating culture.
it is, yeah. And I think it's also alternatively called the Geechees. So it's either the Geechee or the Gullah.
Oh, okay. That is not a term I have heard. What surprised you about your interaction with the Gullah culture?
I mean, they're very proud of it. I mean, they certainly are very proud of it, fiercely independent. They're aware of the history and the dark part of the history. They didn't dwell too much on that. I mean, they were very kind of positive people, and they kind of were very proud in telling us about what they experienced, about their families, and some of the stories that they told us.
They're actually very open too, and they're very sociable. So like when we were touring around, the locals who are actually in the same store, because we had to go and stop at the store for like drinks and stuff, they were very open. They were like talking to everybody like we were part of their
Where you're
family.
from, and
Yeah.
Very cool.
So our next stop, it's called Kibi Island. It's so close. It's actually like a 30-minute drive from the city center.
Okay.
That's where the local Savannah people go and get their beach fix. If you're a tourist, the most notable place to go in TV would be their lighthouse.
It's an historic lighthouse. It's very well preserved, actually. So it still stands very well. You can climb to the top of it. I'm not entirely sure how tall it is. I don't think it's as tall as like the St. Augustine Lighthouse. But certainly when you climb to the top of it, you have very nice views of course, the water.
It is 90 feet tall.
Right next to it, there are some nice seafood restaurants there. For example, the one we visited was, I believe, the North Beach Bar and Grill. Seafood stuff, burgers, fries, but big portions again, friendly service. But I would say in TB, that is kind of the main attraction, is that lighthouse and the kind of the area around it.
So if you go a bit north, it's between TB and Savannah. It's called Cockspur Island. So it's a bit in the middle. You will find Fort Pulaski National Monument. It was built in 1812 as a new fortification to protect the U.S. against invasion. So it's like since the U.S. at the time was colonized by Britain, France, and Spain, once the U.S. got control of the East Coast, they built this fort to protect against them coming back, like the Brits or the French or the Spaniards from coming back.
Well, and since the Brits did come back in 1812 and burn our capital, there's some reason to build coastal defenses. So
This fort is actually close to Savannah too, as I mentioned, and is also open for tours. It's got a nice view of the river. It's a good stopping point if you are
Passing through.
Yeah.
Excellent. Where to next?
Our final stop will be very close to Charleston.
Hilton Head, South Carolina, is between Savannah and Charleston. So it's closer to Savannah, Georgia, about an hour away from Savannah. When we went there, we went to a place called Harbor Town Marina, which is really a sprawling big complex built on the water, complete with a golf course and hotels and restaurants and a lot of different things. So it's this big complex. The one thing that is kind of nice to see there is yet another lighthouse called the Harbor Town Lighthouse. Now, this one is very small. I'm going to say it's probably half the size of the TB Lighthouse. So it's quite small, but you can walk up there and, again, have some nice views of the water. There's all kinds of different shops, different restaurants there. That's, I suppose, the more, I would say, entertainment part of Hilton Head.
Sure.
If you want to go more towards the nature side, there's a huge place called Pinckney Island Wildlife Refuge. And this is one of those kind of really nice big public parks where you can do a lot of nice nature trails. So you can do bike trails, you can do walking trails. You can see a lot of different things. You can see alligators, of course, again, turkey, deer, raccoons. so
So Hilton Head is a bit of a mix. So you can have all this like nature, but it's mostly known for their resorts. So
Right, sure.
as you are driving through, you're gonna see resort after resort.
Yeah.
So you just have to find these little pockets that will make you feel like a local and just skip the resorts altogether. But if you are so inclined, you could stay at one of the resorts, look at
play
the
golf. Yeah.
stay on the beach, and then move on to your final destination, which will be Charleston, South Carolina.
Right.
So it's a good like stopover place if you are in the mood for a road trip.
Yeah, I would not spend 3 days there. If you're not doing the resort stuff, then there's not really enough to see for like 2 or 3 days. But certainly as part of a day trip, it's worth it to stop over and just check out.
Okay. Well, and let me recommend some companion episodes to this one for anybody who's interested in doing this trip up the coast here. We have an episode on St. Augustine in Florida, just a little south of where we started. And then we have another one on all of Georgia, as well as one specifically on Savannah. And then we have another episode both on Charleston and then one further north on the Barrier Islands in North Carolina. So basically, you can follow Amateur Traveler episodes all up the coast here if you want to do this trip and you have a little more time than a week. As you know, I tend to try and limit our guests to a 1-week itinerary, but in this case, that's easily going to fit into a larger itinerary if you have more time. What was the highlight for you?
I did say Cumberland Island just because of the combination of the history and the wild horses. I will say, to add to that, I do like history a lot, and of course Civil War history. So to see these different Civil War forts and learn about the history behind each of those forts, and just seeing that, how they were built, how they were maintained, what the purpose was, how the soldiers lived there. So to me, that was kind of, I guess, for me, a particular highlight, just to see the history behind that whole thing.
Okay.
For me, I would have to say it would be Cumberland Island as well. It's interesting, like seeing the mansion ruins. I love castles myself. Sure. So that's the closest thing to a castle that I could see very close to Jacksonville, where we live. So to actually see it up close and see all these wild horses, you're like, my gosh, these people are immensely rich that they have 2 mansions and they own the island. And the fact that they have converted what used to be one rich man's playground into a national seashore is something that's amazing for me. So it's a way of us like showing that we can turn something that used to be owned just by one person into an island that can be enjoyed by future generations to come. There's so many wild creatures who live in that island in peace that I really loved it.
Now, with the wild horses, when we're in this part of the world, are the wild horses the leftover from Carnegie's stables or somebody like that? I wouldn't think we're talking about Spanish conquistador horses or something like that at this point.
They were definitely introduced by the Carnegies and just kind of left there. Yeah.
So when they abandoned the island, they kind of abandoned their horses too.
Yeah.
And they found a way to survive on their own.
Yeah.
So they're more feral than wild in some ways. Well,
they are.
Except that there are several generations wild at this point, yeah.
You can bike right past them, you can even walk past them, but...
They actually kick you.
Yeah, they'll kick you, of course. I mean, so you're invading their space, so just keep a safe distance, but very beautiful animals.
Oh, also, if you are in Fernandina Beach and you want a chance to see these horses by the beach without stepping foot in Cumberland, you can take a boat tour. There's a 2-hour boat tour from Fernandina Beach that takes you to the shores of Cumberland Island. They cannot dock in Cumberland Island per se, but they just take you around the marshes of Cumberland Island. If you're lucky, you could see the horses. Or in our case, when we took the boat tour, we saw them. So we did it on the sunset, so it was very beautiful. And that was our first glimpse of Cumberland and what made us go there in the first place.
Excellent.
But with our itinerary, we would really suggest like booking tours and ferries in advance, especially for Sapelo and Cumberland.
Okay.
Because you don't want to make this big itinerary and then find out that these tours are not available on the dates that you need.
Sure, yeah. You're standing in the prettiest spot in the Sea Islands. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
On the beach of Cumberland Island, staring out at the ocean. That's personally for me.
Okay.
I'm standing in Dungeness, imagining what it would look like before it was burned and the grandeur that it could have had.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in the Sea Islands.
Actually, when we were standing on Cumberland Island, there's like a little like a river or like a water.
A marsh.
A marsh. There was a marsh, and there were horses around this marsh. And from our spot, looking at those horses in the marsh, it looked like they were walking on water. So that was kind of an amazing, kind of
We called him
incredible
the
sight.
Jesus horse.
Yeah, we called it the Jesus horse, just walking on water. But it was a kind of very funny
We
sight.
had to look twice.
Excellent. And you really know you're in the Sea Islands when what?
You see the bugs in Jekyll Island at your feet.
Next to beautiful tree trunks.
And if you had to summarize the Sea Islands in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Historic,
Okay.
beautiful,
Wild.
and wild.
Interesting. Okay. Our guests again have been Ruby and Peter. Ruby and Peter, where can people read more about your travels?
www.ajourneyoflove.com. It's our travel blog. I guess we're more towards the budget side of it. So if you like to have,
You like to look at those grand resorts and then stay someplace more affordable. Is what I'm hearing.
Correct.
I get you. I'm
That
with
is
you there.
exactly right.
Then you can afford to go twice. So
Yes. Or yeah, exactly. So that's kind of like our focus. So yeah, please visit us there at Journey of Love.
Well, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for the coastal regions here of Georgia and South Carolina, the Sea Islands.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting and a lot of fun to talk to you.
I want to remind you that there are still some spots open for the Amateur Traveler trip to India in November. You can find out more information about that on the website, or you can help plan next year's trip by joining the private Facebook group amateurtraveler.com/trips. In news of the community, I heard from Joe, who said, "Hi, Chris. Just wanted to say how much I enjoy your podcasts. I listen to them while walking every morning, and it makes the time just fly by. We travel quite a bit, so I always check to see if you have an episode for where we are going. It's also nice to hear about places we have already been to and remember the great time we had visiting those places. Thanks for the wonderful information. I'm a little concerned that if you're listening every morning, you're going to catch up with me. But thanks, Joe." And I heard from Jillian, who said, "Hi, Chris. Just a quick line to say I very much enjoyed listening to your show on Gdansk last week. I have also been listening to a lot of your shows on the archives and was very interested to hear the show from back in your archives on Armenia, which sounds like a real interesting country to visit one day. Best wishes for your forthcoming trip to India soon." Well, thanks so much, Jillian. And speaking of Gdansk, I heard from Steve, who I just listened to your latest episode on Gdansk. I really enjoyed it. My wife and I also visited on a cruise, and we wanted to get back there and see more of Poland. Maybe after our several months in Australia and New Zealand. As it turns out, I married a fabulous Polish lady. She is a third-generation U.S. citizen. As it turns out, I was able to meet and talk to many of her relatives that migrated to the U.S. in the early 1900s before they passed. They had fabulous stories to relate and wonderful food to enjoy. I enjoyed it so much that I got into the genealogy of her family along with her cousins who were stationed with NATO in Europe for over 20 years. Together, we were able to find many relatives throughout Poland, and he was able to go and visit many of them in their homes. The pictures from their homes and villages, along with the transcripts of the conversation, are fascinating. Several takeaways from our research. The Polish people are some of the most hardworking and resilient people I've ever met. They have a fabulous sense of humor and great food from natural products. Next, they viewed the Russians, Germans, Prussians, and others as interlopers. Through all that oppression, they maintained their culture, humor, and positive attitudes. I'm pretty sure that my German/English ancestors would not have fared as well. It's so sad that history is always written by the victors. We lose so much as a result. Happy travels, Steve. Well, Steve, half of my family are those Prussians that you were speaking of there, but I understand what you're saying, and I also want to get back to Poland because the part of Prussia that they were from is now in Poland. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.